Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the Women in Medicine Summit, a transformational CME conference happening September 13th to 14th at the Drake Hotel in Chicago. Engage in leadership programming, learn negotiation skills, receive on-site coaching and mentoring, and see who will win this year's I Stand With Her awards. This year, we're excited to offer unique programming that includes a special session on how using improv comedy can bring fun back into medicine. We also have financial sessions tailored to help you navigate the complexities of personal and professional finances. Discover ways to advance into leadership roles, combat burnout, and either reignite your love for your current role or find joy in a new career path. Don't forget our Friday evening gala, a highlight this year you definitely won't want to miss. Register now at womeninmedicinesummit.org and be part of the movement that is shaping the future of healthcare. Join us to network, learn, and celebrate the power of women in medicine.
When we go to medical school, we're brought into a system that's very focused on achievement. We get used to checking off boxes, climbing ladders. And after a while, some of us begin to wonder, where is this ladder going? Am I enjoying myself on this ladder? Could I move to a different ladder? Maybe I'm just going to set this ladder down. If this sounds like something that you've been thinking about, you're going to love today's episode. Join me in a riveting conversation with Dr. Shawn. We're going to be exploring her groundbreaking work that she's doing in gender equity research. She is an emergency medicine physician in the New York City metro area. She is also a board-certified medical toxicologist. She's spent the past several years working on gender equity issues within emergency medicine and medical toxicology, and has spoken extensively about how the pandemic has disproportionately affected mothers, including an appearance on the Today Show. She is founder of Research and Advocacy in Gender Equity, known as RANGE, which is a foundation that was started in 2022 with the goal of funding and supporting research in gender equity, as well as innovative programs that help address particular gender equity issues in the workplace and society at large. Her goal is to help decrease gender bias and destigmatize caregiving, allowing for a more equitable culture for everyone. Welcome to the Revitalizing Doctor podcast. We interview trailblazers in medicine that embody the Revitalize Women vision to empower women to innovate and influence medicine, to value authenticity, respect, and work-life harmony. We recognize the challenges in medicine, and we're committed to providing coaching-informed strategies to help you go from surviving to thriving. This is such a timely conversation. I'm so excited to have Lauren here.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is really exciting to be here.
One of the questions we always start with at Revitalize is, tell us about your journey to becoming a doctor. And the reason we start with that is oftentimes the reason you're still a doctor may or may not be the same. So what's your doctor origin story?
I was one of those kids who was always into science. And, as I got older, it was sort of, am I going to go the PhD route or the MD route or both? And when I was 19, I was in a car accident and I ended up having really significant neck and upper back pain and had painful paresthesias going down my arms. And, I saw doctors, I had an MRI and my discs and my spine were in alignment. And over time, I was doing PT and not getting better. And everyone just kept saying, well, you're just an anxious pre-med. It's just anxiety. You need to calm down and relax a little bit. And I was like, no, I'm in pain. And I finally saw a neurologist and had an EMG 6 months after the fact that found I had C5 and C6 distal damage. That was explaining a lot of my symptoms. And I'm someone who lives with chronic pain. It can be well managed, but going through that experience, it really made me think I could probably do this better than a lot of the people I'm seeing. I felt like I wasn't listened to, I wasn't heard. I actually had to learn how to kind of advocate for myself, and I didn't want patients to have to go through that as well. So that really pushed me going towards the MD route instead of the PhD route.
Wow, that's such a powerful story. And my neck injury isn't anything like yours. I have a herniated disc from my military deployment. So I sometimes get flares, and every time I get sick or hurt, obviously it's not fun, but I'm always amazed by how much empathy it gives me and how much I change the way that I interact with people after I have, a bout of pain or a bout of illness, and knowing that I have so much knowledge and insight versus our patients. If you didn't have any idea what was going on, how scary it must be.
100%. 100%.
So I'm really excited to hear about RANGE. Can you explain to our audience what that is?
Sure. So RANGE stands for Research and Advocacy in Gender Equity. We are a nonprofit foundation of 501c3. And our goal is to take donations and lump them into grants, hopefully doing a few grant application cycles per year where we fund research projects for people who study gender equity issues, and also what I call development projects, meaning things that address a particular gender equity issue within a workplace. So for example, a residency program might want to make a proper lactation room. A group of doctors might want to have wearable breast pumps. They might want to start an emergency child care fund or have a workshop to help women with contract negotiation, any sort of thing. Really want it to be whatever a person sees is an issue in their life, in their workplace, and coming up with a creative solution to, address that issue. We want to be able to support and fund that. So that's sort of the main impetus behind it. The advocacy work is really about just sort of increasing knowledge and understanding and awareness about gender bias, caregiving issues. So everyone understands that it's sort of a human being issue. It's not really a woman's issue. Everyone, regardless of whether or not they have children, will probably face some caregiving or self-care issue in their lifetime. It's an elderly parent, it's a sick partner, a sibling in crisis, whatever it is. We want and expect people to care for us, but we turn it into such a thing that seems trivial and mundane, and we don't really prioritize it in a way. And the way we sort of siloed it is saying, well, it's a woman's thing. Women are the caregivers. And really should be, everyone can be a caregiver. And I think by doing that, it will stop penalizing women professionally for wanting to integrate that better into their careers. So that's a lot of the basis of the work we do. On our website, we hope to be a resource where people can learn more about, policy issues, landmark articles about gender equity, research, reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, things like that on our website. So we hope to become a hub of information in the future as well.
I love that. And where did you founded RANGE, and you have a co-founder, correct?
Yes, Professor Advocacy, who is another emergency medicine physician and a mom. And we actually worked together previously on Feminim's Gender Equity in Medicine Research Foundation. And that was similarly designed to raise funds to fund gender equity research with a focus more on emergency medicine as opposed to medicine at large or society at large. And unfortunately, around 2020, 2021, we had to dissolve it. And I was tasked with the responsibility to sort of dispersing the last funds. And so I created a grant application. And at the time, we're slowly emerging out of the pandemic. I, kind of phrased it as fixing the broken rung, addressing issues that came up in the pandemic. And I got like 40 plus applications. The vast majority of them were like amazing, interesting, so creative. I wanted to fund all of them. And, I tried to fund as much as I could. And going through that process, I also started learning about how nonprofits are set up, how to dissolve them, all the rules. And I was, finding myself to actually feel like empowered and energized and excited. And, it felt so good to support people with really good ideas. And, after coming through a really dark and bad place during the pandemic, it was like this moment of like, oh my God, am I feeling joy again? Like, I haven't felt this in a really long time. And it's like horrible to say, but like, it had been like, a year plus of like really not doing well. And suddenly being like, this feels really special to me. And I want to keep it going. And I owe it to myself to keep it going. And so I spent the next year or so kind of coming up with this vision, researching how to do it, setting it up with some pro bono lawyers to make sure everything goes correctly. And, I'm in a position, of privilege in the sense where I was able to cut back significantly on my clinical workload. I didn't have the financial pressure to stay full time or anything like that. So I want to use my privilege for good, to actually help other people with these issues, help support the problem solvers who are out there, who are coming up with great ideas to address these issues. And so that's really kind of the heart and soul of where RANGE comes from.
I love that story so much. And it's the pattern that we see over and over on the podcast is everyone that's doing cool and exciting things, almost everybody has a moment, many moments of things being hard. And if you've been in medicine, especially if you've been a woman in medicine, the last 3 years have been really challenging. So it's exciting to see people get more clarity on, what their vision is, what their values are. And I'm guessing you also made some decisions about what your boundaries were as well.
100%. So, a big thing of my road to, I guess, wellness, coming through physical and emotional pain and difficulties during the pandemic was becoming very intentional with where I put my energy and my focus. And, setting boundaries, being okay with saying no, and really questioning what I do based on, is it meaningful or interesting to me? Is it something that serves me versus is it something that looks good or seems impressive? Or, kind of changing that mindset to really focus on, what are my values? What are my needs? What are my wants? And so that's been an interesting process. And that's also, obviously affected me professionally in that I left academics in 2019 and I had a lot of guilt and anxiety about that. I started working per diem in a community EM setting, which I really enjoyed. But, after the first wave of the pandemic, that was really traumatic for me. I cut back significantly. So I essentially turned into a stay-at-home mom who works a few weekend or Friday swing shifts a month. And, it's been working well for me since about September 2020, but I had felt really guilty and anxious about that. And, one of the other things that I've kind of worked on with the therapist is sort of redefining my self-esteem. I think for a lot of women physicians, we feel a lot of our self-worth and our, self-esteem comes from achieving, things professionally or academically and, that we're smart and we're driven and we do all these amazing things. And so when you kind of stop or you radically decrease it, what are you kind of left with? I almost focused on that to the exclusion of other things that felt more uncomfortable. So, really just thinking about self-esteem is I intrinsically have worth and value, and it's not so much what I do. It's just who I am. And so doing this, even if I succeed or fail with this, it's still okay.
Totally. I love this. It's exactly what Linda spoke about at ASEP last year is about moving, and you used the word already, intentional, that you're intentional about what you're doing instead of being achievement focused. And unfortunately, many of us self-selected for being more achievement based when we went to medical school. And if you weren't achievement based, then you got soaked into a culture that's very achievement based. And then you get very used to, then I also, like you, was in the traditional academic model of, it was listed out, here's assistant, here's associate, here's full professor. I understand that there's value in that and that people can have a very meaningful career moving through those stages. But there's also a lot of achievement that goes with that and being asked to do things that often don't light me up, don't fill my cup. And so I'm excited. I actually wrote an article a couple of years ago about redefining your academic career, drawing outside the lines. And I've also shifted into a community-based residency program that's much less rigid than the traditional academic model and values more innovation and letting me do all the other things, including revitalize without limiting me, which if I had been at a traditional academic site, they really wouldn't allow me to do all these fun, cool, crazy, innovative things that we're doing. So tell us more about some of the projects that people could apply for with Range. I mean, some of what you were describing, may I dare say, didn't sound exactly like traditional research. It almost sounded more like process improvement. But is that the aim that you could take something very practical and do research related to it?
Yeah, no, it's both. So, we kind of tried to separate two different grant application processes. So there are people who are doing real gender equity research in a systematic and formal way, and we want to be able to provide funding for those people. But I found a lot of times people want to make change. They want to improve something they see that's going on in their workplace, in their residency, whatever it is. And it's not meant to be some really formal research project. It's really meant to be some sort of quality improvement or a process, or even just something that's a really tangible fix to an issue to try to make, the experience better, for the women in the workplace and things like that. So we wanted to kind of create a space where people can get funding because, and I'm sure from academics, it's very hard to get funding for that kind of stuff within your department because you kind of have to prove like, what's the financial incentive to do this? What does it do for the department? And I think a lot of times it's hard to show like, well, helping your female physicians feel happier and more recognized and more successful in the workplace leads to retention, and that has a financial incentive. It doesn't seem as tangible as like a big NIH grant or, bringing in some, really big famous physician or whatever it is. So I think there is a need to help people get these ideas off the ground. And I think sometimes showing that they've gotten outside funding perhaps would leave a department to actually be like, oh, this is real. Like somebody actually thinks this is like a good idea, we'll match that or we'll give some additional funding as well. So it's really trying to fill that void that I think comes up a lot in academics where it seems like frivolous or you can't really see, it's hard to convince the higher ups that it's worth investing in.
Right. And I want to press on that a little bit. It was a different podcast I was listening to, and they were talking about this argument that we have all the time about whether equity is financially makes sense. And the person responded that, I'm really tired of having that argument. I'm not going to do it anymore. It's the right thing to do. And I'm struggling with that right now. And I wonder, in a way, is Range filling that gap that, yes, the business argument's hard to make. So we're just going to figure it out as a nonprofit and make this work happen.
It's a little bit of both. Because, I think that is a big issue that comes up in equity discussions, DEI discussions, of this thing of like, okay, it's a nice thing to do. It's the right thing to do. When the reality is there's, especially in like academic medicine, there's been this corporatization of academics where everything's about the financial bottom line. And so I think a lot of times there's this, to get it sort of pushed up to the peak of the mountain or pushed over the hill, you have to have some sort of financial rationale for support, which is unfortunate, but that's sort of the reality of the world that we are in. So I think we come in to sort of give that initial push. Be like, hey, this is a good idea. Hopefully some of the projects we're supporting, get implemented and maintained, and that, over time they can actually show some metrics of improved, promotion and retention and satisfaction and decreased burnout and all these important variables that over time shows that, hey, guess what? We didn't have to, hire or have a huge amount of employee turnover or, oh, and look, we have these amazing physicians who are doing amazing projects now who would have maybe otherwise have left, something along those lines. So it's a little bit of wait and see. But I think we're kind of trying to address both sides of that issue.
That's awesome. So if somebody wants to get involved and support Range, maybe they want to donate money, or let's kind of break it out. Let's start with if somebody wants to donate, how would they do it?
So first and easiest place to go is www.rangefoundation.org. It's our website. There's a big green donate button right there on all the pages. We work with DonorBox, so you can use Apple Pay and Stripe, and we make it very easy to donate, and any amount's appreciated, and it is tax deductible. So that obviously is our biggest need. We can't give out grants without money, and we don't have money without donations. So obviously that's, the biggest impact people can contribute to. But we've also wanted to create opportunities for people to feel like they're getting more involved, fill their tank a little bit with doing something meaningful. So, for example, if you're somebody who's into writing and you want to write a piece about why a particular policy issue is important, or a personal experience with gender bias, or, something along those lines, like we would publish it on our blog, as something where people could use that as an outlet to express themselves. Similarly, if you are a policy junkie and you're really into keeping up to date with what's going on at the state or national level for like paid leave or reproductive choice or something along those lines, and you want to help update our website, and that way you get involved that way. And finally, our goal is hopefully as we get more funding and more donations to have more grant application cycles, hopefully get more grant applications. We'd like to have actual committees of people helping us to determine who should receive funding. And so there are applications to join one of either our research grant committee or our development grant committee if you'd like to be involved in helping us decide who gets funding on future application cycles. So, they're not meant to be labor or time intensive. They're really meant to be something that's meaningful for people who are interested and passionate about these issues. But, again, check out our website, www.rangefoundation.org, and you'll see all about what we're doing.
I love that. And I'll definitely put a plug in for joining a committee in which you review grant proposals, or, I've been on awards committees for years. And when I first joined an awards committee, it was like, oh my gosh, I've never read a package like this. I don't know what I'm doing, but I learned a lot from being on the committee with people that had read more packages and were able to give that insight. And now when I write awards, so vis-a-vis if you were writing grants, you have a better understanding of what goes into it if you're reading them. So it's definitely, I would imagine you could look for both types of people to be on these committees, whether, you've got a little bit of imposter syndrome and like, I've never written a grant that's gone to funding. Well, that's okay. There'll be somebody on the committee who has, and you'll start to learn what goes into it. So I love that. I want to hear more about, there's probably somebody listening right now that's like, Lauren's doing something amazing. She's founded this nonprofit that's going to change the world. I could never do anything like that. Could you talk a little bit about your journey on what it's been like to do something like this that's very different than working a clinical shift in the emergency department?
Yeah. And I think it kind of comes from really listening to yourself and kind of being honest with yourself about what's pulling you in or what's meaningful or exciting to you. Because I think a lot of times we suppress it because it seems like not realistic or not aligning with our clinical work or, whatever it is. So if you find yourself ruminating or thinking about, something that really matters to you, then, I've had this conversation with a lot of female friends and colleagues in medicine who are looking for something else or a way to sort of reinvigorate what they're doing. I say, it just starts with doing a little research. A lot of this was I started researching how nonprofits were made and how they got dissolved from my previous work. And I realized, it's actually kind of not that bad. Like, maybe I could do this, toying around with a vision statement. Can I actually write out, like, objectively what I want to do, what I hope to achieve? And just starting with these little baby steps of like organizing and planning out your thoughts, like trying to understand the scope or the environment of what you're interested in getting involved with. You realize over time, like, I actually could do this, or, I actually accomplished writing this out and I actually really love what I wrote and I'm excited to do it. So, this was developed over the course of like a year. Like, this wasn't like, I just went and applied for a 501c3 and magically I have this nonprofit. This was more like me spending a year on my free time, toying around with it, touching base with people in the nonprofit industry, getting hooked up with, lawyers who helped me pro bono. Like, it was a step-by-step process. It's not, it just happened in a day and I just magically knew what to do. And I'm still learning. And, a lot of the advice I got was, set your expectations on the lower side the first year or two. Don't beat yourself up and kind of have that growth mindset. For me, I had to put myself out there and trying to ask for donations, which was uncomfortable and new for me. Being more involved in social media, writing things up, learning how to use WordPress and MailChimp and all these other skill sets I wasn't as familiar with. It's been piecemeal and doing it over time. But, each time I get a little better at it and I feel a bit more comfortable with it, it's great. So I would just say to anyone who's interested, just start writing out what you're thinking, what you're interested in doing, start trying to organize it, have, small plans of action that seem doable. And you'll be surprised yourself that looking back, how much you've actually kind of accomplished and worked through it.
That's beautiful. And I can't agree more. I mean, you're building Range, we're building Revitalize, and it's the same journey. We started 2 years ago and it takes time and it takes iterating, trying something out. Where does it land? Experimenting, and then being willing to adapt and change. So again, I think, when we became doctors, yes, it was very hard, but I also knew when I got into medical school that nearly everyone that gets in graduates because it's such a competitive process to get in. With starting a business or a nonprofit, that's not the statistics. So for us I went to medical school, I was pretty sure I was going to walk across stage 4 years later if I just stuck with the plan. There's not that straight line. And for most of us, that causes a lot of anxiety. And then, I've had to do a lot of work like, okay, so if this doesn't work out and other people find out about that it didn't work out, am I managing my image right now? Or, was it not worth doing it because of the risk of somebody being like, oh, you tried something and it failed? So I had to do a lot of that inner work that if this matters to me and it fails, it still is the right thing to do.
100%. Yeah, no, that's a big thing. It's sort of the embarrassment of like potentially failing in a public way and learning to be okay with that. And that kind of goes back to some of the self-esteem work of just like, you know what, even if I fail, like I'm okay. I was brave and I tried something new. And it was interesting when I was leaving academics and I similarly went through a process of like figuring out what exactly I was unhappy with and like what could I change, and kind of came up with like working at a place closer to my house, per diem. A lot of people were like kind of in awe that I was willing to do that. I think there's a lot of inertia and a lot of expectation of like, well, you did med school, you did residency, you took this job, like you are supposed to just do this and follow this straight line. And then when you find yourself at inflection points or points where you're just like, I want to get off, it's scary. And to just even be brave to make a change, I think a lot of people will look at you and be really supportive and proud of you that you like tried something new and got out and changed something to make yourself feel better, or do something better for yourself, is a really huge leap for a lot of people in and of itself.
Yeah. And I think we get into very binary, like if I do this, I've completely closed off all of this options. I could never go back to academics. I'm closing the door. And that's not really often the case. I mean, there's, be emotionally intelligent, be mature when you leave a position, be as honest as you can with protecting your own boundaries. But for the most part, none of this stuff is about closing doors. You can walk back through them at a different moment, but you have to do what's right for yourself and your family. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Are you a physician mom with school-aged children feeling utterly exhausted? My friend Dr. Sheeta Shaffi invites you to take a little time this summer to join her in a small, intimate group for meaningful conversations. Dr. Shaffi is an emergency physician, coach, and mom to 8-year-old twins. She understands firsthand what you're going through. This isn't a pizza party or a yoga class. You'll meet for 2 one-hour sessions twice a month starting in July to help you move out of exhaustion, let go of mom guilt, and live a life you're not only proud of, but can truly enjoy. Connect with her on LinkedIn or Instagram at Sheeta Shaffi to learn more. Sheeta is spelled Shideh, and Shaffi is spelled Shafie. You can also check the show notes for a link so you can connect with her there as well.
Right. And nothing is permanent. You can try something. If it doesn't work, it's okay. And also, I tell people, you are replaceable to your work. You're not replaceable to yourself in your own life and to the people who love you. So, first and foremost, like you have to think about things in terms of how it's serving yourself and what you need and what you want. And the rest will kind of come in hand. And don't worry about necessarily, you're right. Don't burn bridges. Don't, piss people off. But you also don't have to sacrifice yourself because you have some idea that you emotionally owe something to your job.
Absolutely. And most people are compassionate, when you're clear to them about, why you need to leave or why you need to cut down on hours. And if you're doing it in an emotionally responsible way and being as honest as you can, and somebody is cruel to you, then that's a red flag. That's toxicity, and you probably need to leave that place as soon as possible. If you had a magic wand and you could fix 3 things with gender equity in medicine right now, what would be your top 3 wishes?
So I think first and foremost would be more support for, pregnant physicians, maternity leave, not referring to it as a vacation, having more compassionate scheduling for people who are 3rd trimester or postpartum. I think I see so many posts on social media and like physician mom groups of like women really feeling like I might lose my job, or I'm afraid to take as much time as I want to be with my child, and really struggling with that decision. And I feel like it's this very artificially imposed thing that we could be a much more supportive culture with regards to that. And similarly, again, going back to paid leave, recognizing that it can include men being involved in caregiving. It should just be a human being issue. It's not just a woman's issue. And, kind of reframing those conversations and those policies in a much more compassionate and equitable way. Secondly, and it kind of ties into this, I think there's a lot of professional segregation in terms of what women do and what men do in medicine, in the sense where, women got a lot of feedback of, well, you can't be a cardiothoracic surgeon and a mom, or a neurosurgeon and a mom, or you can't become a chairperson and be a mom. Even if they're not planning to have children, a lot of people assume, well, you're going to get pregnant and probably like go part-time and not contribute. And I think, sort of, again, destigmatizing caregiving and creating it as much more of just an equitable human being culture, as well as this idea of like accepting that some people have to slow down, but they can always ramp up again, and that there's sort of waves and flows to your career. And it's not just this like diagonal that keeps going up, and that we had a much more compassionate, holistic view of this person has a lot of talent. I'd like to retain them, and I should really do what I can to support their development. And if they need time off, or if they need to create some boundaries in their scheduling, like, let's make it work, as opposed to just being like, no, women can't do this. You all just, are going to go off and have babies and not take this seriously. And I think a lot of women do take their job seriously, but they also recognize they have other big priorities in their life too. And a lot of times the men who are the most vocal about, disparaging women in this way have full stay-at-home partners. And so they're not really thinking about or seeing it. They just say yes and do what they need to do professionally. They're not really trying to balance things. And I think we need to have a more honest discussion about it. I think we need to have more normalization of men being involved in some of these work-life balance issues. Like, how often do men's groups have these conversations versus women's groups having these conversations? That kind of thing. And then the last thing I'd say is involving like sexual harassment and sort of toxic work environments. I think, both calling it out when it happens, whether it's a patient doing it or, a colleague or a supervisor, really not having tolerance for any of it. Unfortunately, a lot of times we see in the media, somebody who has actually ended up sexually harassing or sexually assaulting people for years and years and years, but they were a super productive researcher or like a really high profile physician. And so it was always kind of overlooked. And a lot of people got harmed, So I think really taking a stand and saying it's not okay, and just sort of, really creating a much more just culture and a zero tolerance policy for that type of behavior.
I love that. Yeah, there's so many cases that when they come forward, people knew, they had heard the comments. And my big thing now is even what's, quote, small comments, even just talking badly about moms, the motherhood penalty, that is on the spectrum of dehumanizing women. Mm-hmm. And that is the first steps to allowing these more horrendous things to happen. And so we have to stand up, and we need our allies too. We need men. And I've been encouraging men that I work with, like, could you please take your family leave after your wife has your baby, because she would probably appreciate it. And it's role modeling. It's starting to make it more normative that, like you said, humans need to take care of other humans.
Really that simple. It's a really amazing thing. We put so much emphasis on like our children's health and safety and their development, and we're very intensive parents. But when it comes to actually doing things that really support people in their caregiving, we're so hesitant to do it for some reason, because it seems like we're not being productive. When in fact, the work you do to care for another person is incredibly important. It can be labor intensive, but it's like such a vital thing to our society. And yet we undervalue it all the time. And even not only on the personal level, but if you see now, like there's a exodus of teachers and professional caregivers and healthcare professionals. And a lot of it is because we get abused, because, there is this sense of caregiving is not the priority, and we don't value it as a society. We value, either the financial repercussions or what makes it things more profitable. And I think there's a lot of societal effects of how we sort of view these issues on the personal level.
Absolutely. So the work is huge. There's so much stuff that has to be done. And when you're in the arena, having to do all of this, well, not having to, you get to, you want to. It's still hard though. Like anytime I'm doing equity work, there's a level of me that it impacts me. Sometimes it activates prior traumas that have happened, and it's just hard to deal with the world not being right. How do you keep your cup full and come at this in a place that you're staying well while doing this challenging work.
Yeah. And I think, again, it comes back to sort of that self-esteem work, that intentionality work of like reminding yourself why you're doing what you're doing, learning to be more comfortable with discomfort. Because a lot of times, not only is it potentially activating, prior pain or upsetting memories, it also could just be things that you normally feel uncomfortable doing, and pushing yourself to do it and learning to kind of being okay with that and processing it. And whether that's professionally with a therapist or with a close friend or, a coach or somebody to help you kind of work through that mindset to be okay with the discomfort and, the possibility of failing and all that kind of stuff is really huge. I think I try to remind myself like, oh, remember that time you were afraid to do that and you thought it was going to be terrible and actually it worked out really great. Like you try to like keep a little list of like the wins and be like, remember how you fell and it actually ended up being okay? Like try that again. Like it'll probably be okay again this time.
Amazing. Well, this has been such a joy having you on the podcast. I want to keep up to date on what's happening with Range. I know you mentioned the website earlier, but is there any other ways our listeners can connect with you or follow Range on social media?
So myself, LK Shawn, and Range Foundation, we have Facebook and Instagram. We are technically on Twitter, but honestly, I've kind of moved away from Twitter given a lot of the recent developments. But we are on Threads now. You can catch us that way. So yeah, definitely check out our website. Our social media links are there as well. People can reach out to me. LK Shawn is my handle on all my social media contacts. And again, www.rangefoundation.org.
Amazing. Well, I look forward to hearing more about Range. And the next time I get a great idea about how something could be better where I work, I'm going to reach out and see if there's an opportunity, bounce some ideas off of you.
No, that would be great. And thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome to have a forum to kind of talk about these things in a more in-depth way.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for listening to The Revitalizing Doctor, a project of Revitalize Women Physician Circle. Our mission is to connect women physicians and allies through innovative, value-based coaching methods that align trust, support, accountability, and skill development to ignite the courage and clarity necessary to take bold actions, create change, and thrive. If you're interested in working with us, check out our website at peoplealwayshcc.com/revitalize or email us at revitalizemmm.info@gmail.com. This podcast represents the views of our host and guest. It does not reflect the views of any institution we work for or with.
Hi, it's Dr. Risa E. Lewis, dropping in to tell you about a book that Dr. Adara Landry and I wrote. It's called Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact. It's a business self-help book coming in 2024 by HarperCollins. Pre-order now. Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact, wherever you buy your books.